Hi friends, thanks for joining me for another couch convo. I'm really excited as we begin a new topic today, and we begin a discussion on the Lord's Supper. Maybe you haven't heard that term before, or maybe you know the Lord's Supper by a different name. Maybe you know it as communion, or the Eucharist, or the sacrament of the altar. But today we're going to be talking about the Lord's Supper. We're going to be using that name. I'd like for you to start this discussion by talking with those around you about what you know concerning the Lord's Supper. Maybe you don't know anything, and if that's okay, that's what we're going to be talking about is the Lord's Supper. But maybe you know a lot and you want to share in a great discussion. Go ahead and pause this video then and make sure you're able to have a full discussion, and then when you're done, we'll be right here when you're finished. Before we get into a discussion specifically on the Lord's Supper, I need to tell you a story. It comes from the second book in the Bible called Exodus. And it's actually a really long story, and I'm only going to hit the high points. But it's about a people group called the Israelites, and they're slaves. They're slaves in a land called Egypt. They want to be rescued. They need to be rescued. They're literally in chains. They're getting beaten and whipped and treated terribly, and they want to be free. So they pray to God. God hears their prayers, and he sends them a man by the name of Moses. Now, Moses is going to be kind of like the mouthpiece, or he's going to speak for God. And Moses is going to perform some pretty incredible signs, and he's going to do that for God. So Moses goes to the leader of the Egyptians called Pharaoh, and he says, "You need to let these people go." And Pharaoh says, "I'm not going to let these people go." And so Pharaoh says God's going to bring some destruction upon this land then. He's going to send some things called plagues. And plagues are just some really nasty, terrible things that happen to the land. God sends 9 different plagues, and then he sends one final one, a 10th one. But I want you to look at this list of the 9 plagues on the first 9 plagues on the screen. Terrible things like water turning into blood, and gnats coming all over the land, livestock dying or having skin diseases. I want you to talk with those around you. What do you think would be the worst of all these plagues? What do you think would be the absolute worst one to experience? Talk about that, and we'll be right here when you're done. Well, the first 9 plagues were pretty terrible, but the 10th one was the absolute worst. God told Moses to tell the Israelites that he would send an angel of death through the land, and that angel of death would take the life of all the firstborn males. But there would be one way for that angel of death to not enter that house and take those lives, and that would be by taking a lamb and killing it, and taking its blood and kind of like painting it on the doorframe. Upon seeing that blood on the doorframe, the angel would pass over and would not enter that house. No one would die. Well, the angel of death came just as Moses told the people, and many people died. Pharaoh was so upset, he pretty much said, "Israelites, you get out of here. I don't want to have anything to do with you anymore." And that's why we get the name of the book, Exodus. They exited the land. You see, God heard their cry. God saved them, and for hundreds, if not even thousands of years, they celebrated, the Israelites did, this event and would call it the Passover with a special meal. Well, 1,500 years later, Jesus would be celebrating this meal with his disciples. and he was passing out the bread. And instead of just passing out the bread like he usually would have done, he said, "Take and eat. This is my body. And take and drink. This is my blood given for you." Now the disciples had never heard those words before, so they must have had some crazy thoughts going in their heads. I'd like for you to just a moment talk about what you think might have been going through those disciples' heads when Jesus said, "This is my body and this is my blood." Well, obviously, we don't know what the disciples were thinking, but I'll tell you what the disciples did not know is that the very next day, Jesus would be put on the cross. He would die for all people. But then 3 days later, right, we know the rest of the story, he rose again. Jesus was going to not just free the disciples, but all the world from a type of slavery, just like the Israelites experienced. But their slavery was here on earth, whereas our slavery is to sin. We need help. We can't save ourselves, just like the Israelites. And Jesus knew it. So he was going to tell them that, or he was telling them that he was entering a new covenant, a new relationship with those people, with his people, so that they might have forgiveness. Friends, the Lord's Supper is such a great thing to talk about, and we're going to continue more in our next session. Thanks for joining me, and we'll see you next time.